like I said, I've been enjoying this class. I hope you have too. And don't forget, if for some reason you're not able to make it, you can find us on our Facebook page. You can find us on our Facebook page or our Facebook members group. If you aren't on Facebook, another very easy way to find us is through YouTube. Just go to youtube.com, and then you can search for King's Crossing Church of Christ, and you'll see what's basically our channel. Click that, and you should see the if you happen to be on while we're live, you should be able to pull it right up.
And what site is that?
That is youtube.com. That's right. Yes, sir. YouTube. So we've already got 2 people joining us so far, so that's good.
Past classes are on YouTube also?
Past classes and the Sunday morning auditorium class, as well as Sunday morning worship services. All those will be on YouTube. My class that meets in here is available through our website, and that's just audio recordings only. I use a little microphone that I can plug right into my phone, and it takes pretty decent audio recordings. So anyway, all right, we've already got some folks joining us on Facebook. I was trying to figure out the count last week based on, I think we had about 15 or so people last week online, and we had roughly around 15 or so in here. And I was telling Linnea, it's like, I think that could easily get us over 30 or so people, because not every person who's watching is just one person. There's usually maybe 2 or 3 people. And she said, well, I did have you on the TV and my computer and my phone. And then I noticed too that I noticed in class, Easter Bell, who, by the way, was brave enough to sit on the front row. I hope you feel the weight of conviction just wash over you. But she's not here, so maybe that's what happened. But Easter Bell was sitting in class right there and had it pulled up on Facebook so she could comment. And so that would have been like a 4th person. So anyway. Grateful for y'all who are here online with us. Let me ask this question. Y'all know I like to start off with open-ended questions, get us rolling, lots of conversation. Have you, show of hands, have you ever taken any kind of personality test of any kind, whether professional, or anything like that? Okay. For those of you who haven't, that does not mean you don't have a personality. Okay. I just want to, sorry. You guys. Let me ask, which ones have y'all taken? Myers-Briggs, okay. Yeah. Anybody else? The what? The Briggs-Stratton. I think my mower's got that personality too. Yeah. Okay. What is that one? What is that one? I'm not familiar with that one.
Basically a psychological test, and they ask, it's like 500 questions, and it's basically
Minnesota multiplicity.
there you go. So, and it basically is really, really detailed because it is supposed to be able to diagnose any
oh wow, okay,
psychology classes, like any personality problem.
So the MMPI, if somebody online wants to find that and grab a link for that. Inventory. Personality inventory. Okay.
And also, I recall taking a test when I was a freshman in college to basically help you, guide you to your interests.
Yeah, something almost like an aptitude test. Yeah, okay.
And I was quite shocked that basically it came back, and underneath the byline it said, it was give you an idea of what your interest were, whatever, and it said unacknowledgeable, because I had so many various interests that they couldn't really put me into a category. So it was like sort of neutral. I don't know. It was basically a non-answer.
Yeah, we won't say that Cheryl failed that personality test, but it's questionable. The test failed her. That's fair. Yeah, Randall said the test failed her. Yeah.
Is that the one that comes with a Ouija board too?
Oh, yikes.
Very exciting.
Thankfully, no.
But a lot of the questions, particularly the NPI, they ask the same question in different ways.
Ah,
So
okay.
that
Yeah.
If you, and if you start
You
just.
may trick it once, but they're gonna find out eventually here's what you really think.
They're going to hunt you down.
And then
Yeah.
they'll give you an electric shock.
That sounds like a uncomfortable study that eventually didn't pan out the way they hoped for. Randall, you were going to add something to that?
Back in the 80s, Don and Betty Fortune came out with a book called Discover Your God-Given Gifts. And they had 7 gifts. And the idea was that either you like doing this or you like doing that. And so if you like doing this, then you're this personality type. This is your gift.
But that wasn't like a professionally done one. It was just a discover your God-given gifts.
They asked questions about, do you enjoy doing this or that or this or that? And eventually it came down where you're either a leader or a teacher or I wouldn't say prophet, but you like to determine things that are truthful and good, moral versus immoral. Anyway, they would put you into one of those 7 categories, and I thought it was interesting. So I
Neat.
use that sort of to figure out what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Why.
Cool.
But, anyway.
And what, just for the sake of people listening online, who wrote that one again?
Don and Katie Fortune.
Don and Katie Fortune, discovering your God-given gift.
Discover your God-given gifts.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that was another one that I heard. Yeah, the Enneagram's funny because I first heard about it a couple, maybe 2-3 years ago, and it sounded like it just took the world by storm. And when Linnea and I went to Pepperdine in May of 2018, I spoke at their Bible lectureship, and we had one room in the dorm suite with us and Pete, and then Mark and a buddy of his were in the other room. And so I remember Mark seeming like he was an expert in the Enneagram, and he was maybe he had just taught a class on it, and he was constantly saying, "Oh yeah, well, yeah, because I'm this number, but I default to this number, but my cat is this number." I couldn't. So anyway, I took the Myers-Briggs at one point. I was ISTJ when I initially took it. The I stood for introvert. What's funny is I took it when I just got into grad school in Memphis. I didn't have any good friends there on campus, and I had left all my good friends in Arkansas at Harding's main campus. And so I think I might have reverted some or become a little bit more introverted. Gradually through that time, I became more extroverted. It was necessary for me to do so. I was on the Student Government Association for the school. But yeah, you've probably taken these. All right. So what's the point? What's the point of these kinds of tests? What do they do for us? Yeah.
For the people coming up, pulling those tests out of places.
Joe Ever the Optimist said for the money.
Part of it, I think, is the Discover Your God-Given Gifts was so that you can figure out here's what I'm good at, here's what I want to concentrate on. For the other personality tests, it's basically self-discovery. This is who I am. Sometimes I've heard that in the church, there's cases where people would say, well, this is Jesus's personality. My personality ought to be like his.
Interesting.
So I need to become more like this, and I really like that.
Yeah.
I need to change this part of me to become more like Jesus was.
So Randall's comment, again, for those listening online, Randall's comment was, some people have taken some of these personality tests and tried to retroactively apply them to figures in the Bible, namely Jesus, and have tried to maybe adjust elements of their personality based on whatever this particular test thought Jesus was. Yeah.
In business, we used the DISC test.
Yeah.
Everybody took it, and then we would disclose what your tendencies were so that you would learn how to interact with the person and understand why they did things a certain way compared to the way you did things a certain way.
Yeah.
So that you could create a better environment for you to work in.
Richard mentioned that in his business world, they would take the DISC profile, which DISC stands for dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. I remember taking that in grad school also. I couldn't tell you anything about my score. So anyway, they help us know ourselves a little bit better, right? I mean, that's the idea. Besides to pad these guys' retirement, they help us know ourselves a little bit better. Okay, this is not a trick question. It might feel like an obvious one. Is it good to know about yourself? Okay. Most everybody says yes. Of course. Why? Why is that good?
So you can make the changes you need to make, if any.
Maybe you need to make some changes. Yeah. Could help with some appropriate reflection. Yeah.
I think it's also helpful because we have our image of ourselves and then we have the image that others have of us.
Oh,
And we
interesting.
make that comparison.
Yeah.
And to know yourself is basically, so hopefully to help you project your true self so that people don't look at you and go like, well, is this person a liar or can I trust them or whatever. So I think that we constantly have to balance that, our image of ourselves against others' image of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Cheryl mentioned that these kinds of tests can be helpful, or knowing yourself can be helpful because it can help sort of balance how we might perceive ourselves and how others might perceive us. And maybe by putting those together, we might get a more full picture. Yeah. Randall, yes, sir.
I think it would be nice if we do use these types of tests to figure out who we are and how we can improve. One of the things I remember from the Dan Keith workshop book was it didn't just talk about what your good parts are, but also where you have trouble, what your gift, what sort of problems it causes other people.
Interesting. Yeah.
So you really like this, but you sort of get overbearing towards others and treat them like this because that's what you think is most important, whereas they don't think that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
So in my life, since I've done that, I have tried to recognize what my weaknesses are and try to not go overboard on some of the things that I have tendencies to do.
Yeah.
Which I think I've gotten better on.
That's good.
But the other side of that, of course, is that some people use these tests to justify their behavior.
Mhm.
Well, that's just who I am.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah.
That's what I do. There's nothing I can do about it. That's just who
Right.
I am. And so yeah, I'm going to yell and scream at people, but that's
Yeah.
It's fully justified because it's
Randall mentioned a couple of things. One, getting to know yourself so you can maybe work on some of those weaknesses, like what Stella mentioned also, which was similar to what Richard had mentioned too about the DISC profile, helping you understand maybe how you can interact with the people around you. The problem is, again, for the people listening, the problem for that Randall saw was all too often they can easily be used as justifications for, well, that's just who I am. It is a horrible, horrible thing for any Christian to say, well, that's just who I am. Have you heard of the Holy Spirit's transforming power to make us more like Jesus? Yeah. Thomas, why did you doubt? Lord, that's just who I am. I'm right here in front of you, Thomas. Stick your finger through here. Okay, we get that. All right. So that's about ourselves. Let's shift focus just a little bit. How do you get to know someone else? Randall said, give them a personality test. Yeah. Hi, I just met you at church. I'm glad you're visiting with us. Would you take this DISC profile, please? Yeah. Yeah. Have you heard of the MMPI?
Usually, I think spend time with them.
Kathy said, spend time with them. That's right. Yeah.
Yes, spend time, do an activity together or
Mhm.
Eat together or
Yeah.
something like that. Just some kind of invitation that gets you meeting.
Yeah. Spending time is kind of an obvious one. Is that sufficient? Or,
No, I think talking and communicating.
yeah. Yeah. I like to ask open-ended questions that encourage people to reflect on how they've grown and matured over the years. So at the risk of self-aggrandizement or self-promotion, some of y'all might be aware that I have a podcast, which is which is like a radio show. Okay, just radio was maybe popular a couple of generations ago, right? Podcasts are essentially the same thing. It's a radio show. I use this microphone and have a little production studio in my office. I have interviewed people that I know well, and I've interviewed people that I've never actually met. I have just read their books. And one quick way to get to know somebody is to just ask a couple of open-ended questions, or like, yeah, how'd you get into this? Yeah. And then you suddenly see, oh, this person who is a giant in their field, and they're so well read, and they're so well respected. Oh, they're a normal person. They like the same kind of stuff that I do. They laugh at silly Bible puns, just like Linnea does. I've trained her well to laugh at my jokes. So asking these kind of open-ended questions is helpful. Let me ask you this. Do you think that this is a valuable exercise for you? To pause and ask yourself, why do you do X, Y, and Z?
Yes.
Okay. Why do you think that's a valuable exercise? What do you think?
Because just asking the question
Mhm.
is a whole different deal than just saying, well, that's just the way I am.
Yeah.
By asking the question, then asking the question of yourself means you got to reflect on yourself.
Yeah.
And particularly, usually that would mean something that's not altogether great about yourself.
That's fair.
Well,
And you reflect on
because you
your
don't really
motivation.
need to ask the
Oh,
whole
yeah.
stuff about yourself. Because, hey,
Yeah.
yeah.
So Joe
Bad stuff.
mentioned the importance of pausing and reflecting. And Kathy mentioned, what would you say, to look at motivations. One of the most effective ways of doing this is to pause and ask yourself, why do I do that? And it's just a simple question. Why do I do that?
And sometimes, as she said, it helps us to make changes that we really need to make.
Yeah. And so Brenda, pointing back to Stella's comment from earlier, sometimes it helps us make changes we need to make. Let me ask this again. So we're kind of piecing all this together. Does knowing yourself better allow others to know you better?
It's an honesty. You're truthful to them, and so they can tell that you are.
Yeah. Brenda said there's an honesty about it. Almost one word that's common with folks in my generation is that there's a transparency. There's a willingness to demonstrate that I don't have it all together. Another word you might hear is authentic. That word gets overused by people in my generation, but I think what they're pointing at is pretty useful. It's too easy. It's unrealistic for everyone to always have it all together all the time. And people in my generation, I think, have finally picked up on the fact that is just not true. Perhaps, boomers and Gen Xers picked up on that as well. Maybe we just picked up on it earlier in our development, Gen Y or millennials. And so to have somebody say, I do actually struggle with this. And I've got people who hold me accountable. That's interesting to hear them say that, because then, as they have gone through that process of knowing themselves better, I can know this person a little bit better and connect with them. I like that. I can better understand.
Kevin,
Yes.
also, you know them better, you realize too, after a while, that you have the same problems, the same concerns
Mm-hmm.
as the other person. You're not alone.
Yeah. Linda said that if you know somebody better, you can realize that they have the same problems and same concerns. That process of kind of learning about yourself and then sharing that with others, that process leads to greater intimacy in friendships. And intimacy, of course, is by no means always sexual. Normally, we hear the word intimacy, and you think, culture tends to think of sexual intimacy. But when I think of intimacy between friends, I tend to think of, by way of analogy, something like companionship. Companionship. That, there's a deep closeness that somehow also, when you think of a companion, that's usually somebody that you're also loyal to, right? You don't just have an acquaintance that you would call them as a companion.
Like agape love.
What's that? Oh, like agape love. It's something that would bind people together. Yeah, that's right. Kathy.
You can talk to somebody, you can talk to a person that is a close friend or an intimate friend about anything, and they know they can talk to you about anything without judgment.
Yeah.
You're able to just lay it on the table, and they listen, they don't judge. If you ask for help, they're going to help you. If you just want them to listen to you, they just listen.
Yeah. And especially with friends of that quality, the non-judgmental, which is an important thing to have. There is, of course, a time and a place to be able to say, hey, I don't think this is, but it's not, especially with close friends whom love the Lord. It may not always be the very first thing. It may be you need to let somebody kind of get it out and process, and it might even seem kind of risky. Again, keep in mind, we've been talking about overcoming doubt. And I've mentioned how a lot of times, teens and young adults, they are in this process of deconstruction where they're trying to figure out, do the things that I've learned actually stand up to test? Are they worthwhile? And sometimes you've got to let them sort of work through this. And if you can manage to listen non-judgmentally enough, there's not always a right time to jump in and say, I don't think so. And there are times when you definitely first need to say, what are you doing? Absolutely not. I don't want you to come home in the back of a police car. Or worse, have Joe Alley drag you to my front door. Not anymore.
Jody drags me now. Yeah. It's all different, right?
There are times when I will not repeat comments for the online audience.
Okay, so-
Joe, what were you going to say?
So on
Yeah.
on that kind of transparency and intimacy
Mhm.
with, say, people in church or friends or acquaintances or whatever, it also gives you the opportunity to learn how to love them
Yeah.
with their foibles, warts, and wrinkles.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something, because I'm the guy that makes real, I don't like that guy.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm that guy, so many times. And so now I've got to where I don't trust my initial
Interesting.
judgment.
Yeah.
Because I've been wrong a lot.
Yeah.
And so I think and you accept people. I've got friends that,
Sure. Right.
But you just don't.
Sometimes you sit back and wonder, how did we get to be
you have
friends?
let everything they do irritate you.
Mm.
Learn
Yeah.
to kind of let stuff roll off and blow
Yeah.
stuff off.
Yeah.
Kevin, I've got a question regarding, you were talking about teenagers deconstructing everything.
That's why you
And
tolerate.
sometimes that their behavior can be, I guess, looked at as sort of a test for adults or other people around it, because maybe they're testing your limits as far as, are they still gonna love me? Are they
Sure,
still gonna
yeah.
accept me? I did this really silly thing, and what are they gonna do or say?
Yeah.
And so I guess it's possible that it's a test of our love.
Yeah. Cheryl mentioned that a lot of times, especially with teenagers, they might not even know it, but often they act in ways that gauge, the sincerity and the depth of our connection and affection with them. And Joe mentioned earlier the importance of learning about others and how that can help us grow in our love for them. And especially too, I would say, that if you can get to a point where you have love, if you've understood yourself well and know your areas where you fall short, then ideally when you see that in someone else, you can say, you know, I do the same thing. It's not good either way, but maybe instead of a snap judgment, it can be, okay, what has helped me to overcome this shortcoming? Would that then be useful for this other person as well? Does knowledge of someone equal intimacy with them? No. Turn with me to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 7. Matthew chapter 7, verse 21. Matthew is my favorite gospel, by the way. Does anybody else, is Gospel of Matthew anybody else's favorite gospel in here? Really? Are y'all all Gospel of John fans? Everybody likes John. It's so fun. It is the one that's different. Yeah. Matthew chapter 7, verse 21. Matthew chapter 7, verse 21. This is interesting that we're talking about knowing ourselves. The heading in the New Revised Standard Version is concerning self-deception. That's interesting. Matthew chapter 7, verse 21. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many deeds of power in your name? Then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Go away from me, you evildoers. Okay. Question. Why does Jesus tell them to depart? Pretty straightforward question.
Because he doesn't know them.
He doesn't know them. He never knew them.
And they essentially didn't really know Christ. I mean, because they're not doing the will of the Father.
Yeah. Cheryl said that they didn't really know Christ.
So who are
What
these
they were
guys?
doing was not, their motivation for what they were doing was not what he was looking
Yep.
for.
It appears that their motivation is other than God's glory. They didn't allow God to be there with them. Yeah, let me ask this question. What does it mean that Jesus didn't know them? Is there anyone that Jesus doesn't know? What does he mean? I never knew you. There's no relationship. Yeah, there's no intimacy. Yeah.
So who are these guys?
Maybe because they were of the world and not accepting him.
Maybe. Joe's asked the question, who are these guys? Joe, you would ask an interesting textual and historical question. This is a difficult passage because there's no reason, based on what we have here in the text, I cannot see a reason why these people are lying. Imagine the presumption of lying to Jesus when, if you really knew you were a scoundrel the whole time, rolling up into heaven on Judgment Day and saying, but Jesus, didn't I actually do all this cool stuff? And Matt, I would say, like, there's no indication that that's what's going on here. And what?
Tammy Faye.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And anyway,
They could have done it, but since Jesus knows their heart, they could have done it with the wrong intention.
I think we face a couple of uncomfortable things here. If Jesus is, again, this is a hypothetical situation where Jesus is saying, Lord, did we not prophesy and cast out demons and do many other miracles in your name? If these people in Jesus's hypothetical situation actually did those things, then it would appear that they were given the gift and yet used it inappropriately. Very much so. Speaking about their fruits, you'll know them. Or maybe Jesus just picked the most impressive looking things and said, hey, it doesn't matter if you can do all of these cool things. What matters is true intimacy and knowledge of God. That is what's true. So, Joe, there are a couple of ways we could look at that.
That reminds me of 1 Corinthians 13.
Very much so. 1 Corinthians 13, that more excellent way, smack dab in the middle of a discussion about spiritual gifts in chapters 12 and 14. And Paul intentionally, this is not just, Paul didn't stop in the middle of a discussion about spiritual gifts and said, hey, guys, I want to tell you about what you should say at a wedding. I don't think that's where Paul was going with that. I think it was about, hey, these spiritual gifts are cool. And God be praised that he has given us these wonderful things to build up the body. But the more excellent way to build up the body is love. Yeah, Joe, that's a good catch there. In the context of Matthew 7 here, the kind of knowledge Jesus envisions here runs deeper than merely knowing about someone, right? He must mean something closer to the sense of recognizing or acknowledging someone belongs to him. I recognize that one. That's mine. Whenever I have to, normally I can leave the office in time to be able to go with Linnea and Samuel to pick up Peter from school. But sometimes I have to meet them at the park in our neighborhood, which is where the bus drops off all the kids. And it's a lot of fun. The neighborhood kids and parents all stay and hang out together. And on nice days like today, that we're out there for about an hour. So it's great. I can drive up and I still maybe, 75, 100 yards away, I can see a little tuft of golden curls, or I can see Pete's, exuberant sprint a ways, and I may not even be able to see their faces, but I recognize that one belongs to me because I know them. I know them. Today, I was putting something in the trash can, and I went like this. And Linnea said, "Are you okay?" Because she knows that when I sigh, it's usually because I'm thinking about something that's weighing on me, and at that moment, I happen to be. She recognized this is someone that belongs to me. I believe this self-knowledge that we've been talking about, and that which also enables intimate knowledge of ourselves with each other. I believe self-knowledge, like what we've said, enables fuller, more comprehensive repentance. Now, we're going to read between the lines. We're going to read and also read between the lines of a story that I alluded to in a sermon a month ago. We're going to ask questions about motivations and hearts of real people doing real things who make real decisions. Turn with me to Genesis chapter 37. We're going to read a lot. Genesis chapter 37. Carol and Easterbell, glad y'all are able to join us on Facebook. I showed y'all's comments just a minute ago on screen here, but I appreciate y'all being there. And that Russian bot on YouTube, may God bless you as you seek him. Yeah, Genesis chapter 37. We will start in verse 18. Verse 18. For the sake of the recording, I'm going to read this. And here's what I want us to look for, okay? I want us to... I'm going to read a lot. And I want us to think about the character of Judah, even though this is essentially Joseph's story in Genesis 37 through literally the rest of Genesis. There's a strange aside in chapter 38 that we'll get to in just a moment. But we're going to, as you're hearing these people do these things, ask, all right, what would motivate them to do that? Why would they do that? Ask those kinds of questions to yourself. Genesis chapter 37, starting in verse 18. Joseph's brothers saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let's not take his life." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father." You think Reuben wants to be the hero here? Verse 23. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Is that important in the desert? Yes. Okay. Then they sat down to eat. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Now, depending on what part of the country you're from, myrrh is a spice, or it could sound like they had mirrors. They had myrrhs. Verse 26. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." Yeah, that's better. We won't kill him. We'll sell him into slavery. And his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. All right. Reuben was not there when that happened. He comes back. Joseph is gone. They tell him what happened. Skip down to chapter 38. All right, so that has happened, and we've seen Judah play a role. We've seen Judah play a role in deceiving his father. He was part of the deception of tearing the coat and making it look like an animal. Genesis 38. We're going to read through this quickly, but again, pay attention to motivations. It happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. He took her and went into her, and she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name She conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. Yet again she bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. Judah was in Chezib. Whenever you see a CH in the Old Testament, it's not a ch sound, it's a k sound. It's like you're spitting. Chezib. When she bore him, verse 6. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. We have no more information than that. Just there you go. Then Judah said to Onan, "Go in to your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her and raise up offspring for your brother." This was a custom, so that way Tamar would not be childless, but that she would have, quote unquote, children that were adopted. You can figure it out. What's that? It'd be the eldest. Yeah, it'd be they in the eyes of the culture they would be considered not Onan's children but Er's children. So anyway, but verse 9. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, so whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would waste the semen on the ground so as not to give offspring to his brother. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah, my son, grows up." For he feared that he would die like his brothers. So Tamar went and remained in her father's house. Once again, Judah is deceiving someone. In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. When Judah was comforted, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hira the Adulamite. And when Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep," she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil, wrapping herself up, and sat at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown up, and she had not been given to him in marriage. In case you missed the deception, once again, the story points it out for us. Verse 15. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute. for she had covered her face. He turned to her at the roadside and said, "Come, let me come into you," for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, "What will you give me that you may come into me?" He answered, "I'll send you a young goat from the flock." And she said, "If you give me a pledge until you send it." And he said, "What pledge shall I give you?" She replied, "Your signet and your cord and your staff that is in your hand." So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. Then she arose and went away, and taking off her veil, she put on the garments of her widowhood. The deceiver has been deceived. When Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adulamite to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her. We're going to read into verse 26. And he asked the men of the place, "Where is the cult prostitute who is at Enaim at the roadside?" And they said, "No cult prostitute has been here." So he returned to Judah and said, "I have not found her." Also, the men of the place said, "No cult prostitute has been here." And Judah replied, "Let her keep the things as her own, or we shall be laughed at. You see, I sent this young goat, and you did not find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she's pregnant by immorality." And Judah said, "Bring her out and let her be burned." As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, "By the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant." And she said, "Please identify whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff." Then Judah identified them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah." And he did not know her again. All right, quick context question. Who is Judah's father? Jacob, also known as Israel. Israel, which is usually translated something like struggles with God, wrestles with God. How did Jacob come to have his birthright? He deceived his father. He deceived his father. Tricked Esau out of it. That generational sin came back to bite Israel, meaning Jacob's family, as his sons deceived him, saying Joseph was killed, and as Judah's own daughter-in-law deceived him. You're beginning to see a pattern here. Deception that is not good. Divine justice tends to bring on you what you do to others. Yeah. It is.
We could go back to Abraham a couple of times. He told people that Sarah was his sister.
Yeah.
It didn't mention that she was also his wife.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Divine justice tends to bring on you what you do to others. There is generational sin here afoot. All right. So keep Judah in mind. And now think. Years later have passed in the story. Joseph has been sold to Egypt, and you remember Joseph's story. He was a slave. He found favor. A lie sent him to prison. He helped a couple of guys out. He was in prison for years until he got his chance. And then slowly, again, years pass. Years pass. When we come to Genesis chapter 42, verse 35. Genesis chapter 42, verse 35. Genesis 42, verse 35. Years have passed, and this is one of the instances where they've gone down to Egypt. They've come back, and there appears to be something strange afoot. As they emptied their sacks, behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when they and their father saw their bundles of money, they were afraid. And Jacob, their father, said to them, "You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more. And now you would take Benjamin." Simeon is being held in Egypt. And Joseph in disguise is telling them, "You need to bring your youngest son before I see you again." And so now Jacob is terrified that his youngest son, Benjamin, he says, "Now you would take Benjamin," into verse 36, "all this has come against me." I wonder if any point in this story Jacob sits back and thinks, man, did I bring this on myself? Verse 37. Remember Reuben earlier? He was going to bail Joseph out and be the hero. They're having to decide, are they going to take Benjamin down to Egypt or not? And are they going to risk losing their father's baby boy? And Reuben pipes up in verse 37 with perhaps one of the dumbest ideas in all of Scripture. Then Reuben said to his father, "Kill my 2 sons if I don't bring him back to you. Put him in my hands and I will bring him back to you." Reuben, we need to stop losing sons. This is not helpful. Verse 38. Jacob replies, "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm should happen to him on the journey that you are to make, you would bring my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol." Chapter 43. Now the famine was severe in the land, and when they had eaten the grain that they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, "Go again, buy us a little food." Verse 3. Judah shows up for the first time since chapter 38. But Judah said to him, "The man solemnly warned us, saying, 'You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you will send our brother with us, we will go down and buy you food. But if you will not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you.' Israel said," meaning Jacob, "Why did you treat me so badly as to tell the man that you had another brother?" Do you hear the question there? Why didn't you just lie to him? Yikes.
Because that works every.
Right. Verse 7. They replied, "The man questioned us carefully about ourselves and our kindred, saying, 'Is your father still alive? Do you have another brother?' What we told him was in answer to these questions. Could we in any way know that he would say, 'Bring your brother down'?" Verse 8. And Judah said to Israel, his father, "Send the boy with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. I will be a pledge of his safety. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. If we had not delayed, we would have now returned twice." Then their father Israel said to them, "If it must be so, then do this." And he gives them further instructions. In these verses, do you think Judah has reflected on his past?
Yeah, in a way, I see this as trying to make amends. He's trying to.
Maybe he's trying to make amends, yeah.
Because he sort of instigated, he was the one who came up with the idea of selling Joseph initially.
Yeah.
And now they are in dire need and they've got to go back to Egypt, so he's trying to do the best he can to make it right.
Judah's trying to do the best he can.
Well, and at the end, he does say, "May God Almighty cause the man to be merciful to you." And he says, if I lose another son,
Yeah. Judah has learned what it is like to lose children. And so instead of doing the boneheaded thing that Reuben suggested, and causing yet more loss of children, Judah steps up and says, essentially, Father, I know what this is like, and you know that I know what this is like. And therefore, you know that I will do everything in my power not to let this happen again, because you and I have both felt similar stings.
Did they not know back then that, I mean, it's still to this day, it's like if you lie, it creates more problems. And you can't, that lie's gonna create
Yeah.
more problems, like at some point you just gotta stop.
You would think that they could just look back at their family history and say, yikes, man, if we had followed God's plan the way God wanted us to follow his plan and stopped trying to take it into our own hands and then lying our way out of it. Yeah. Randall.
Two things. Number one, Judah also mentions the fact that by putting Benjamin at risk, they will end up saving everyone's lives.
Yeah.
Because otherwise there's not going to be any food. They're all going to die.
Mhm.
But I think also the fact that Israel had grieved for 20 years for his son, and Judah had been there with him to see all the pain that he and his brothers had caused to their father.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what he's trying to overcome. We don't want to cause you any more grief. We're sorry we did it the first time.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Judah.
Didn't admit it there, but yeah.
I think we can. The text doesn't tell us this, okay? But again, we're looking at real people with real decisions and real motivations. I think we can faithfully read between the lines of the story and see that Judah has reflected on his past and eventually came to play an honorable role in preserving the promise of God's faithfulness to Abraham's family. Process of dying to ourselves. Yeah. By looking at the ways that God has gifted us, our strengths, our weaknesses, how we've grown over the years. A favorite question of mine to ask is, think about a sin that you struggled with 10 years ago. Did you struggle with that sin 5 years ago? Did you struggle with that sin 10 years or 1 year ago? If you can say no, then praise God, you've grown. And so by looking at the ways that God has gifted us, our strengths, our weaknesses, and how we've grown over the years, by having that reflection, that appropriately critical reflection, not critical in the sense of harsh and abrasive and abusive, but critical in the sense of taking an honest, let's really pick this apart. We can have a more accurate perception and a more accurate perspective of ourselves, where we are no longer ignoring the things we don't like about ourselves or repressing the pain of the past. It's so easy to just say, oh, I'm fine, or no, it didn't bother me. As we learn to know ourselves better and love ourselves for who we really are and who, by God's grace, we are becoming, and not just this false vision of ourselves, but by learning ourselves and learning how God sees us, we are better emotionally and spiritually equipped to know God more fully, to see God's work more clearly, and to learn to love him for who he really is and not just how we think he might be. If we can do that hard work of learning about ourselves, maybe we can come to some realization of, why am I struggling with faith in God? Well, it's because of this thing that happened with these people who should have been the people to teach me about God's love and grace and forgiveness and yeah, love does mean, hey, but there are boundaries. But instead, when I think of a father, I think of tough love and discipline only. That's a lot of people's experience. Thank God that was not my experience. But that's a lot of people's experience. If we can learn to know ourselves, not be self-obsessed, but kind of look at what has happened, I think we can begin to open ourselves up to letting God's love come in and break down those things that might keep us from knowing Him and knowing others also.
Do you think on that verse 11 where it says, and their father Israel said unto them, if it must be so, do this. So now do this. Do you think maybe him knowing how he was a man of prayer, you think he went into prayer and then felt like, okay, let's do this? I think
I
felt better about it, like
I
sometimes when we take things to God in
Yeah.
prayer and we just don't trust in Him that He will do the right thing.
I wouldn't be surprised if at some point, I mean, there is some time that goes past. At the beginning of chapter 43, it says, now the famine was severe in the land. I wouldn't be surprised if Jacob, despite his flaws, was probably in some process of prayer and maybe got to the point where he was willing to listen to Judah say, if we don't go buy more food, we're all going to die. Maybe he did get to that point through prayer. It's amazing what God can do if you pray ardently for softened hearts.
So I think this process of self-knowing, of accepting ourselves, accepting us in the sense of not hating ourselves.
Yeah.
Accepting like, oh yeah, man, that whole biscuit on that one.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And noticing the growth.
Yeah.
As well as generating a relationship, right? Knowing God and God knowing us. I mean, how else does that happen with prayer?
Prayer
I mean,
is, yeah.
I mean, prayer dash meditation, prayer, well, I mean, what prayer? That's what it is, it's prayer.
And having it increasingly close and intimate friendships with brothers and sisters in Christ who want what is truly good and God honoring for you.
And are willing to be transparent.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm pretty much an open book. I mean, Jody, on the other hand, is not. She's a little more guarded. She's the constable's daughter. And but I'm just kind of an open book.
Yeah.
Open my mouth, I never know what's going to happen. Usually, sometimes really bad stuff happens.
That's why we've got you leading a class on prayer, so that way we'll be sure.
I'm just sort of there, and everybody else talks. And I say, well, okay, it's time to turn the lights off.
Yeah.
So
to wrap up, and again, appreciate y'all who've joined us on Facebook and YouTube here. If we can begin to know ourselves, not be self-obsessed, right? Not be narcissistic, but if we can begin to know ourselves and look at how we have become the way we've become, I think we open ourselves up more and more to God's grace and love and forgiveness. And we also open ourselves up to be better loved by our brothers and sisters in Christ. All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate y'all.